Hey y'all! So today we're going to go back into Women Who Run with the Wolves, chapter 10, and we're going to be talking about the section called Fire on the River. And if you're just joining us, remember that we're looking at this book through the lens of life after exiting a toxic environment or a relationship, such as a narcissistic one. So this section, Fire on the River, is really good, and I hope that you guys get a lot out of it. I've got a lot of notes on it, and this one was a little easier to pinpoint what I wanted to read word for word versus what I wanted to summarize. So I feel good about it. I hope it comes across in the way that I intend for it to. I always just want to inspire you to get the wheels turning, and find your own truths, because ultimately that's what we need to be doing, is just doing our own thing and living by our truth. And that's something that just can stand on its own, you know what I mean, when you're living in your authenticity. So let's get started. Fire on the River. Back in the 1970s, the Cuyahoga River at Cleveland became so polluted it began to burn. Polluted creative flow can suddenly erupt in a toxic fire that burns not only on the fuel of garbage in the river, but incinerates all the life forms as well. Too many psychic complexes, all working at the same time, can cause immense damage to the river. Negative psychological complexes rear up and question your worth, your intention, your sincerity, and your talent, just like a narcissist does, right? Totally getting you to doubt yourself. They also send exhortations that assert unequivocally that you must labor to earn a living, doing things that exhaust you, leave you no time to create, destroying your will to imagine. Some of the malevolent complexes' favorite thieveries and punishments of women's creativity revolve around promising the soul self time to create somewhere off in the foggy future. So it's almost like that future faking, you know, that a narcissist puts us through, but it's like it can be an internal kind of blockage, and what she calls a complex that's keeping us putting off an abundant destiny. So it's keeping you from living in the here and now, or promising that when one has several days in a row free, then the rumpus will begin at last. It's hogwash. This complex has no such intention. It is another way of suffocating the creative impulse. Exactly. And so that's just it. And you know, when you're immersed in that toxic environment, it's like you have the grapes, but you can't turn them into the wine, because that process is what gets stunted, what gets blocked and halted by the narcissist. And then unfortunately, that narcissist voice can turn into our own internal voice or complex that we carry forward even after we've exited that negative and toxic environment. And a lot of times people, if they don't get the help they need, this can be a blockage throughout a large portion of their lifetime. And so that's what we want to do, is we want to recognize any of these complexes or traces of a complex we may still have in our mind from that narcissistic abuse, so that we can go ahead and recognize it and take care of it, heal where we need to, so that we can bring forth that abundant destiny, that life of more, you know, more joy and more peace, and where we're not limited. So she kind of goes into a little bit of an explanation of examples how these negative complexes can be at work in our mind. And she mentions the way of thinking where you're caught up in, like, only if, you know, if this, if that, then everything could manifest, you know, in my life. So it's like again, it's putting it off, but it is a foggy future indeed. It's not like a clear, you know, goal, like, well, if this, then this, so I can write it down and take actionable steps to make it happen. It's not like that. It's just like this abstract only if kind of concept, and it just keeps you stuck. And it's just a way that our minds are just stuck in that mud. And So she goes into saying, one of the greatest problems of the creative complex is the accusation that whatever you're doing won't work because you're not thinking logically. You're not being logical. What you have done so far isn't logical and is therefore doomed to failure. First of all, the primary stages of creating are not logical, nor should they be. If the complex succeeds in stopping you with this, it has you. Now, right here, in regards to what I just read to you, I want to bring up a book that's incredible, and I believe it's called Becoming a Writer. It's been many years since I read it, but I have it at home, and so what I'll do is I'll put the information in the description for you. So it's an old book, and it really surprised me when I purchased it. It had great reviews. I thought it was going to be very practical, and when I actually dove into the book, it was talking about this very thing right here, that creativity can easily get stunted, like if you're wanting to become a writer, which is why I bought the book, because I enjoy writing. And so if you are checking yourself along the way as the creative process is happening, you know, if you're applying like the editing process alongside the creative process, it can actually halt the creative process. So it's like you got to let the creativity flow and first and get that out without any obstructions, like that river, you know, that she's talking about in this section, just letting it flow, no obstructions. And then you can go back and you can do your editing. You know, and that was with regards to becoming a writer. And so just like the title says, so it's actually a really great book to learn psychological concepts that are very inspiring. So and it's a short book too, and it's kind of an easy read, but the topics that are in there give you a lot to think about too. So again, I'll put that the information on that book down in the description for you all in case you have interest in it, because it talks about that. Logic has its place. It's so important, but that creative process within us just doesn't need to have any kind of blockages or you know, regulators that are too restrictive. So it says, she goes into talking about, she says, I've seen women work long hours at jobs they despise, so that they can have very expensive things for their homes and their children, things like that. And then she talks about cleaning and how cleaning can can become something where you're like, well, as soon as I get all this done, then I can do X, Y, Z, you know, then I can enjoy life. But you know, in reality, cleaning's never done, and so that's just a mind trick that we get stuck in. And it's that finding that balance again between, you know, logically taking care of and checking off, you know, the things that we are responsible for, that we want to take care of, but also not capping off that creative life force within us that can bring about abundant joy in our present. And so it's kind of that balance where you just keep in check and you stay aware, are there any negative complexes at work that are remnants from being so entangled with this very toxic person for such a long time. It's just, to me, it's about being very self-aware. And then once you become aware, not making excuses for, you know, how you're caught up in those negative complexes. I mean, admit them. That's the first step. Admit them, acknowledge them, and then, you know, work to rid yourself of those negative complexes that are working against you. And that may require, you know, help from a therapist or a coach or something like that, and that's totally fine and great, as long as you get past it and get beyond it, you know. And I feel like that's such a I feel like it's rare. I feel like a lot of people live making excuses to live that way, kind of like crippled in that manner psychologically, and I don't know that it's just a problem of being unaware of it and not having this awareness in their forefront of their consciousness, or if it's, or what it is, if it's fear. But I feel like people who are actually able to conquer this kind of stuff, they have found the narrow path, and that's a beautiful thing, you know what I mean? And so that's just what I want for all of us, to live in abundance and safety, of course, and peace and joy. So, but she says cleaning, how it never comes to an end. That's the perfect way to stop a person. And then, of course, the should. I should be doing this. I should be doing that, you know, and getting stuck and living like, you know, the shoulds. It's going to be another trap. So, now she goes into a part where I feel like you can really resonate with this, specifically with regard to narcissistic abuse and how that creates the blockages in our minds. It says the scattering, because your mind gets scattered with these people. They mess with it. It's psychological abuse, you know. The scattering of plans and projects as if by a wind occurs when a woman attempts to organize a creative idea. Notice it says attempts to organize, and it's like you can. It's like all of these parts within our mind that need to come together to bring us to action. It's like they can't come together. There's something happening where normally they would come together to give us a solid and concrete, clear vision, so that we can take actionable steps in our life. But that's just another, she's going to get into this, so just listen up. The scattering of plans and projects as if by a wind occurs when a woman attempts to organize a creative idea and it just somehow keeps being blown away, becoming more and more confused and disordered. She is not tracking it in any concrete way because, again, she doesn't have time to write it all down and organize it. Or she is called by so many other things that she loses her place and cannot pick it up again. It may also be that a woman's creative process is misunderstood or disrespected by those around her. It is up to her to inform them that when she has that look in her eyes, it does not mean she is a vacant lot waiting to be filled. It means she is balancing a big card house of ideas on a single fingertip, and she is carefully connecting all the cards using tiny crystalline bones and a little spit. And if she can just get it all to the table without it falling down or flying apart, she can bring an image from the unseen world into being. I love the way she writes. To speak to her in that moment is to create a harpy wind. Remember from the last video, harpy wind that blows the entire structure to tatters. To speak to her in that moment is to break her heart. Yeah, it's to interrupt that creative process, right? It says, and yet a woman may do this to herself, which is where the conditioning comes in. So narcissists do this kind of stuff on purpose. They invalidate you on purpose. They get you to doubt yourself. They're so negative, and so it's, I feel like, impossible for a new idea to sprout and flourish in that toxic environment. It's just not going to happen. And then even when you remove yourself, my point is that I want us to recognize the conditioning that remains, the negative complexes that remain, negative self-talk that may remain. Get rid of it, and just be very selective about who we are associating with, who we're letting to be close to us. You know, we want that to be our own kind, you know, people that we truly are aligned with. And so she talks about allowing everyone and their cat to interrupt her at will. So it says that's when the project falls into a shambles. That's where you have to have boundaries, because sometimes, you know, you can't totally remove yourself from every toxic person in your environment, like say at work, but you got to also be able to get good at setting boundaries. And if you're smart about it, then you can do it in a way where a person will recognize, I feel like on some level, that you're onto them. And I think that if you're smart about it and you're creative about your approach, then that connection will dissolve on its own. You know what I'm saying? It's like that person will step away on their own. And so I just encourage you to be creative in setting your boundaries and realizing that it doesn't have to be such an effort on your part of striving so much as just being creative and positioning yourself in a way that everything unfolds in a way that's beneficial for you, protective for you. So, talking about complexes here, she says, if the culture in which a woman lives, and I would say, or the environment, in which a woman lives, or a man, attacks the creative function of its members, if it splits or shatters any archetype or perverts its design or meaning, these will be incorporated in their broken state into the psyches of its members in the same way as a broken winged force, rather than a hale one filled with vitality and possibility. When these injured elements about how to allow the creative life and how to nourish it are activated within a woman's psyche, it is hard to have a depth of insight into what is wrong. It's that fog. Being in a complex is like being inside a black bag. It's dark. You can't see what has hold of you. You only know that you're captured by something. Yes, that's that frozen feeling. Then we are temporarily unable to organize our thoughts or priorities, and like bagged creatures, we begin to act without contemplation. Yes, it's like navigating in the dark. So, and I think from that place, you can be reactive, and of course, they're going to want to prompt you to be reactive, so we know all about that, how that creates a trap, and they try to shame you for your reactivity, and then that keeps you bound by shame, and that's exploited. Your empathy is exploited, your own accountability is exploited, everything that's beautiful about you is exploited. So, yes. So then she gets into talking about, and I didn't make a lot of notes on this next section because I feel like elements of the next a few paragraphs and the topics contained therein. Let me see if I can get this out. It's something that can be expanded into like this huge other topic, and I haven't done enough research to represent it well, but it's talking about creation and different lenses that's looked at through via different belief systems and cultures, and the masculine and feminine, and she mentions like the Hindus it says, for example, so when this river dies, it is without its flow, without its life force. The Hindus say that without Shakti, the personified feminine life force, Shiva, who encompasses the ability to act, becomes a corpse. She is the life energy that animates the male principle, and the male principle in turn animates action in the world. So that's, I think you can take these kind of things and expand on them and research a lot. And I just, for time's sake, didn't want to branch off into that area too much. But if you have interest, I just encourage you to look into that. So let's go on to the next section. It says the destructive hidalgo in the tale is a deep but immediately recognizable part of a wounded woman. He is her animus, who causes her to struggle not with creating, often she cannot even get to that point, but rather with her gaining a clear permission, a solid inner support system to create at will. A healthy animus is meant to involve himself with the work of the river, and this is as it should be. This is like representing how everything should be working within our own psyche, the creative life force and the river, the stream of creation and motivation within us to create, or I like to say co-create our life, with the divine. So she basically talks about how how this in the La Llorona story, he takes over, the destructive hidalgo takes over, and it says he prevents vital new life. Then a woman has fewer and fewer creative options. The animus gains power to push the woman around, denigrate her work. He does this by ruining the river. Let us look at the parameters of the animus in general. Then we can proceed to understanding how a woman's creative life deteriorates when there is negative animus influence, and what she can and must do about it. Creativity is meant to be an act of clear consciousness. It is an act that reflects the clarity of the river. She's talking about clear and clarity, so we're going to get to that in a minute. The animus is the man on the river. He is the steward. He is caregiver and protector of the water. So it's that part within our psyche that, you know, we need to keep healthy. And that's the part that I believe gets tainted by the negative environment that we can find ourselves immersed in, sometimes for years. And so that brain fog is what prevents that clarity, that prevents us from continuing to co-create our life in a beautiful way with the divine, to bring about abundance and joy and all those beautiful things. So I just hope that this has given you a lot to think about. I was checking my notes here, and I don't want to make this too long. The next section is called The Man on the River, so she's going to go more into that specific part of our psyche, and it's fairly long, and that's why I didn't want to put these two together. And then it goes into Taking Back the River, which is great. And then the next story that we're going to get into is called The Little Match Girl, and I'm excited for that as well. So thank you all for coming along, and I just hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you very soon.